Well, hello, everybody. This is the technologically challenged Timothy Gager coming at you live for another virtual Thursdays Dire Literary Series. And tonight, my guest is Tiffany Davenport, the author of the memoir Bottoms Up. And I can't wait to do this. Let's see if I can share the screen without like shutting down the meeting again. There we are. So there's her bio. Hi, I'm Tiffany, and I'm here. No, actually, Tiffany is an author of Bottoms Up, and it's her first memoir. So I'm going to basically just paraphrase that. She's sober. She views addiction as a disease, and she believes that, in her book, believes that it's handled incorrectly, and there's a much better way to handle it with some empathy and some understanding. And her memoir is about her adventures and her path to sobriety, and the book is really wonderful. It's hard hitting, it's sad, it's funny at times, and it's funny a lot of the times actually. And we're going to talk about that later. So I'm going to turn it on over to Tiffany, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and thanks to everybody for joining as well. So I'm going to dive in. I'm going to read you just a couple of pages from the first chapter, if that's okay with everybody, and then we can have a little Q&A and discussion. All right. Okay, and this is from Bottoms Up and from the first chapter. The blood soaked through my makeshift paper towel tourniquet, pouring down the side of the kitchen sink and pooling on the floor. I peeled it back to survey the damage. The sight of the wound startled me back to reality for a moment. I was going to need stitches. This was a bad idea. Why did I do stuff like this? Maybe if I cleaned up the mess and calmed down, everyone would forget the whole thing. No such luck. Troy's message said I'd better tell him what I had done or he was calling 911. I slit my wrist, but not to kill myself, I said when I called him back. Oh, Jesus, Tiff, is it bad? How did you get a knife? I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, I replied, now fully aware of what I had done. Do you need stitches? Are you going to die from this? Well, I mean, it's bad, but no, I don't think I'm going to die. I'll just wrap it up good and it'll be fine. Sorry to bother you. Go back to work. Tiffany, you might pass out. And then what? No one's there and you'll die alone. That actually didn't sound so bad. Tiff? Tiff, are you there? Yes, I'll call an ambulance and get checked out. The paramedics who arrived within 5 minutes confirmed that I needed stitches. Okay, guess I'll just walk down to the emergency room and get it taken care of, I replied. No sense in racking up a bill for an ambulance ride to a hospital right up the street. Ma'am, we're going to need to take you on the stretcher right now. We'll take you over to the emergency room. I surveyed the scene. The paramedic was deadly serious, but I was still looking for a way around the inevitable. Is that really necessary? I'm fine. I wasn't trying to kill myself, just piss my boyfriend off, you know? Yes, Miss Goig. Go ahead and lie down on the stretcher and we'll get you strapped in. Is anyone in the hallway? I asked, reluctantly lying down. Excuse me? Is there a crowd? Like, did anyone see you guys come in? I don't want anyone seeing me get wheeled into an ambulance. I don't think so, the EMT said as he buckled each strap and pulled them tight. On the ride to the hospital, I overheard the EMT say my destination was Elmhurst Hospital, not the hospital up the street. I couldn't make out what he said next, but it was something about a psych ward. Nope, no way was I getting locked up. I had to think fast. That's when it came to me. If I didn't enter the hospital, they couldn't lock me up. As the ambulance pulled up to the unloading dock, I grabbed my purse and carefully unlocked each of the buckles that were holding me down to the gurney. I smiled at the EMT sitting next to me and he smiled back. The poor guy had no idea what was about to happen. The paramedics lowered the stretcher down to the street. As soon as the front wheels touched the ground, I sprang over the side and was in a full sprint before the EMTs knew what was happening. I ran as hard as I could to the nearest corner. A taxi miraculously appeared. God, I love New York. I jumped in, screaming at the cab driver before the door was even closed to drive. He slammed his foot onto the gas pedal. I slammed the door closed. Safely inside, I turned around to see how narrowly I'd escaped. One of the technicians was ending his chase just steps away from where I entered the cab. My heart was pounding out of my chest. Thank God I made it out of there. All I wanted to do was get home and pound a tall drink, or a whole bottle. As the cab turned the corner onto my street, I saw flashing lights everywhere. Shit, The EMTs must have called the cops. I told the cab driver to keep going as I ducked down in the backseat footwell. He let me out around the corner. I couldn't be sure whether the cops were looking for me or if they were there for some other reason. But I'm sure I had two choices. Either hide out until they left or creep past them and hope it was just a coincidence they were outside my building. With no shoes or coat and my buzz wearing off, I rolled the dice. All I had to do was act normal and hide the bloody gauze on my wrist. Shouldn't be too hard, right? I pulled my shoulders back, took a deep breath, and started walking. Look normal, think normal, be normal. I repeated that in my head as I walked right past them and into my building. Almost there. Doing my very best to avoid looking suspicious, I shoved the key in the lock, slunk through, slammed the door behind me, and bolted it shut. Once safely on the other side, I slid to the floor for a moment to catch my breath. Another crisis averted. I grabbed the rest of my bottle of wine and cozied up in bed. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, it was 4:30 a.m. and my phone was ringing. It was Troy. Where the heck was he? Turns out he was wondering the same thing about me. He had taken the subway all the way out to Elmhurst Hospital after work, easily an hour-long ride, only to find out I was never admitted. Now he was in a cab on his way home. On a scale of 1 to 10, about how angry are you? I asked. Well, I waited for an E-train and took it to the last stop in Queens. So what do you think? That really stinks. I'm sorry about that. You want me to have a drink ready for you? Click, dial tone. That wasn't a good sign. Troy walked through the door about an hour later and immediately asked to see my wrist. Tiffany, you're going to need to get stitches. Yeah, that's not really an option at this point. And why not? 2 words, psych ward. 2 more, not happening. Well, you really want your kids asking how someday, you really want your kids asking you someday what those horrible marks on your wrist are from? My God. I'm not going, I said flatly, lighting a cigarette and plopping down on the couch. All right, that's it. Either we walk down to the emergency room now or I call your dad. Jesus, how was I going to get out of going to the hospital? I couldn't, no, I wouldn't be put in a psych ward. Cue the tears. They didn't work. In fact, my half-fake crying only seemed to make him angrier. A few more sips, chugs of wine, when Troy wasn't looking, and we left for the hospital. We sat in the waiting room for an hour before finally moving to an examination room, just enough time for my buzz to wear off. The doctor, who was cold and distant, almost annoyed to see me, sent me off to have my wrist x-rayed, which revealed that one of the slits had half-sliced a tendon, a millimeter more, and I would have permanently lost the use of my left hand. The doctor prepped a gigantic needle of Novocaine. I hate needles. Troy held my hand and the doctor stuck the needle directly into each slit. After a few stitches in each, he left the room without a single mention of the psych ward. Phew. I was ready to go home and get some sleep. But just as I got up to gather my things, the doctor returned and said I needed to wait for a psych evaluation. I asked somewhat sheepishly, "You don't have a psych ward here, right?" "Correct. That's why we're transferring you to our Manhattan location, where our psychiatric facility is located." "No, thank you," I said, continuing to gather my things. "I really appreciate it, but that won't be necessary." "We are required by law to perform the evaluation," he said. "Why? I just came in for stitches." "We take all suicide attempts very seriously," he said. Whoa, whoa, whoa there, buddy. This wasn't a suicide attempt. I was just trying to get his attention, I said, pointing at Troy. "Don't involve me in this," Troy said. I thought about running again, but Troy was blocking the exit. Out of options, I got into the back of another ambulance and was transported to Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. And I will leave it there.
Thank you, Tiffany. That was really, really hard hitting, and I can definitely identify it and relate it to. Now, this is a game that I always like to play. Since that you got, obviously, I don't want to give away the ending, but you got sober, right?
Yeah.
So since you got sober, stuff like how many arrests have you had? How many fist fights were you in? How many times were you brought to the psych ward since sobriety?
So that's interesting because the number is 0, 0, and 0.
It's amazing how that happens.
Isn't that amazing? What's the saying that every time I drank, I didn't get in trouble, but every time I got in trouble, I was drinking.
I understand that one completely. Every single time. And like some reason, the other one, like nothing good happens after midnight. Usually there's, there's italics having to do with alcohol in that. So you're not a very big presence online. I was trying to do my usual research and I couldn't find anything. Now, you're not responsible for the Dork Diaries, are you?
I am not. No, no, no. There is another Tiffany Davenport, and that looks interesting as well.
Are you a dork anyway?
I am. I'm a big dork. I eat dinner at 5:30, and I like to, watch TV, some Wheel of Fortune, some Jeopardy, go to bed early, nothing exciting.
But
You're in
that's
good company.
but that's all that's all consistency, and that's really, really important. Now, how does that fit into, for example, like you being a dork or you being anxious? How does that fit into your story in terms of the point A to where you are now?
Sure. So I've always struggled with that feeling of not fitting in or not feeling a part of. And I also struggled with a lot of anxiety throughout my entire life. And, before I got sober, I really thought that that was my problem. And I thought if that would just go away, then I wouldn't need to drink as much. But I was really putting the cart before the horse and found out that if I stopped drinking, which also adds to that anxiety and that depression, those feelings, and I actually did some therapy and some work around while I was feeling that way, that I could actually overcome that. And so today, I still suffer from, regular anxiety, just like everybody else does, and feeling like a dork, but I'm much more comfortable in my own skin.
A question from Eric on the board here. Do you find that non-addicts can relate to the need to pound a tall drink despite a suicide attempt? So when you're promoting this book, do people that are not self-admitting to be addicts or alcoholics get it or not?
So I think there are parts of specifically to my drinking behaviors that are hard for the non-alcoholic or addict to understand. But I also think that there's a lot of just overcoming and getting from, like what you were saying, from point A to point B, that I think anybody can relate with.
Yeah, I mean, you look like the least likely person to be an addict right now, right? And of course I do see you running from an ambulance. I do get that, but how things are for you now, is it good or bad, do you think, that you're promoting kind of this wholesome look, this wholesome attitude in terms of the big picture and the big message?
Yeah. So I can only be me, right? And, it was one of the things that kind of helped me, I would say, almost get away with being an alcoholic or an addict, was that I don't look the part. I think there's a big misconception and often a stigma that somebody that's an alcoholic is under the bridge, right? And they're in the trench coat, or they're walking around with a bottle of liquor in a brown paper bag. And so I can only be me. And I think that it's relatable to people that aren't in the trench coat, that, are just your average, ordinary 40 something in middle America that drank too much.
Now, you lived right here in my hometown in Boston, and I know that your alcoholism accelerated there. Why do you think that change of was it the change of destination, or do you think it just was where you were in your life that really fueled your addiction fire?
Yeah, that's a great question. Truthfully, it was when I turned 21. So in Massachusetts, you need a special liquor ID card, or you did back in the time, to buy alcohol or to go to a bar. It was really hard to get one of those if you were underage. So you had to be 21 basically to get into the bars. But once I got that ID and I went to the bar, it was the night before my 21st birthday, 11:55 p.m. So I could be there right when the clock struck midnight. I walked in and I just fell in love with everything about it. I liked the excitement in the air. I liked at the time the smell of cigarettes, the everybody drinking and their glasses clanking. And, from then on, I thought, this is what I've been missing and where I need to be is in the bar.
And also, your book talks about the stigmas involved and not really reaching empathy and understanding. So piggyback that into Paul's question. So in terms of that and the systems that are in place, not necessarily the people and opinions. So in what ways do you think the system screwed up and approached your problem incorrectly?
Sure. So I think we look a lot at the physical addiction, we look a lot at the actual alcohol or the actual drug and the physical component rather than what's going on beyond that. And asking the question, well, why are you drinking like this? Like what is really the cause of this? Is it, and a lot of people will say, well, maybe you had a bad childhood or there's some type of trauma or it's situational. But one thing I find in common with all alcoholics and addicts is that they're, have this sort of underlying, depression, anxiety, restlessness, irritability, and there were, and that's why we drank. And so I don't think the system necessarily failed me. I think we're just looking at it in almost the opposite way because once I put down the drink, I'm still an alcoholic and I still have to stay away from that drink, every day. But so it's less about today, it's less about that drink, and it's more about like, what is alcoholism? What is the disease?
Now, once you realized what was going on in your life, what do you think helped you the most get to a point that you no longer needed it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think it's knowledge. I think knowledge is power. And I think understanding that there are other people who think the same way, who feel the same way, who have done a lot of similar things, through a lot of reading, there's everything from books to blogs to everything in between that talk about, the struggles with addiction and alcoholism and beyond just the drink, beyond the, drunkalog, as we call it. And so I find that's really helped solidify, like, yes, I have this. Yes, this is me. But it was interesting because, I was also the last one to know. It was so obvious to everybody else. But it really wasn't until that day that I got sober. And this was months after running from the ambulance that I actually knew fully and admitted that I was an alcoholic.
Usually people are ambulance chasers, you're ambulance escapers.
Yes.
Jim asked the same question that I was going to ask. What are your favorite recovery memoirs?
Oh, that's a great one. So there's My Last Drunk is a really good one. And then I tend to really focus on a lot, and The Drunk Diaries is another good one. I'm forgetting the title of it, but I'll put it in the Facebook chat, after we get off of here. But there's another one about the adventures in drinking and being a woman, and I really related to that as well. And then I really went and did a hard left into all the self-help, and all the books that are out there, and really dove into those after I read some of the recovery memoirs. But and Mary Carr, Lit, there was another good one.
Now, did those books inspire you to write yours? And what was the impetus of you to be like, hey, I've got a book in me too? Tell me about that moment.
So my whole life, I was always in these situations, and people would always say to me, you should write a book, you should write a book, you should write a book. And I got sober and said I should write a book. And so there was something inside of me. It was like this deep desire to share my story and to be as vulnerable as I possibly could with the audience about my experiences drinking and also my experiences in sobriety as well. And I'm sort of the reluctant writer. Like I tried to not write a book for a long time and do other things, by, my day job with marketing or whatever it is that I'm doing. But it just kept on inside of me. There was this voice inside of me that you have to write, you have to write, you have to write. And felt that if I didn't fulfill that, I wouldn't be fulfilling my purpose.
So say you have a good friend that approaches you and says, I can't stop drinking, I can't stop using, and you look at them and they're in rough shape. What's your next move?
My first move is let's consult medical professionals, right? Like just as a formality. I always think it's good. The more help, the better, right? Like let's make sure we're not going to withdraw or detox, and because that can be really dangerous. And then my next thought after that is to say, I understand. And then to share some of my experiences about what I was like on that day when I went and told somebody that I needed help, and the situation that I was in and how I felt and how I thought. And so really just trying to be empathetic and then listening and just really turning over the floor and saying, like, what is it that you need to say? What is it that you want to say? And how can I listen and support you?
So it's action.
Mhm.
Like I know too, like with mental health, empathy and understanding, there's a whole lot about mental health awareness, but when push comes to shove, you're not inviting your uncle to Thanksgiving because he might ruin it. I see the same thing like that with addiction, with addicts. And also if you're kind to them, you might be encouraging and reinforcing their behavior. So what do we have to change in the United States psychology in order to turn this around?
Yeah, so we have to realize that addiction and alcoholism is a mental illness, and that there are causes and conditions that are occurring before somebody even picks up a drink, and that will continue to occur after the drink or the drug is put down. And start focusing on what are those underlying things. Is it the depression and the anxiety? Is it that restlessness? Is it that irritability? What are the things that are going on that is causing someone to pick up a drink or a drug? And switch our focus away from physical recovery, like, just don't drink or put the drink down, or just have one, and really a better understanding, a lot more knowledge and understanding to the general public, that there's so much more to alcoholism. As an alcoholic and an addict, I didn't know any of this until I got sober, and how nice it would have been if, whether taught in school or whether available at your doctor's office or whether it's, covered on the news, whatever it is, that there's information out there about, how people think and feel as addicts and alcoholics, and really the reasons behind the using, and then what it's like to actually be sober.
All right, Jimmy's got a question. Reading any of these memoirs sparked the urge to drink, or does anything still trigger you? How about that?
So, it's interesting. They say, birds fly, fish swim, and alcoholics drink, right? And so I think there will always be inside of me, every once in a while, that thought that a drink looks good, because who on the first nice summer day, you see everybody sitting outside on the patio, and they're having that margarita, and the ice and the condensation on the glass. And for a split second, it can look good. And I wouldn't be human if I didn't say that every once in a while that occurs. But for the most part, the majority of the 99% of the time, I, think that through, or I'm not thinking about drinking. And I feel like the longer that you're sober, the more you get used to that sober lifestyle. And so, for me, I'm thinking about, when am I going to have my next, pumpkin spice latte, or something of that nature, rather than an alcoholic drink.
Yeah, I mean, it happens to me when I view Roy Rogers' horse, which is a joke that 1% of the people will get. So Eric, Roy Rogers' horse was named Trigger. Eric's question, to piggyback my point: does your family accept your recovery journey? Did they have a tough time with it? Did they have a denial? Tell me about your family, and also, I guess there's a second part of that question. Let's start with the family.
Yeah. So it was definitely a lot of tough love, especially towards the end of my drinking, which was really difficult at the time, because I felt as if I was being abandoned, or I felt as if I wasn't being understood or heard, in the sense that, my parents said, there's nothing we can do for you. You're making your own choices, and we've offered you help, and we've offered you support, and you don't want it. And that was difficult at the time, but I realized that that was probably the best thing for me in that situation, first and foremost. And second of all, they were doing the best they could with the knowledge that they had. And so once I got sober, though, the amount, and there's a story in the book about how my dad and I started to actually really build a relationship, starting when I was about 8 or 9 months sober. And it really took me owning the past and having accountability and responsibility about the things that I had done, with no excuses, no holds bar, and own up to all of that. And then it just took time. I had to give time. And, it probably took a couple of years before they were, kind of looking over their shoulder, or if I called wondering if I had picked up a drink again. But, now there's a that trust is back. And I don't take that for granted. It's a really special thing.
Now, did you feel you never had accountability before while you were using, or was it more like, learning how to do you recognize your role in things, or did you recognize your role in things beforehand?
Oh, not at all. It was everybody else's fault. I pointed the finger. I was the victim. Had that woe is me. If you had my life, you would drink too. I could not see that in every situation of my life, except for the things that were truly beyond my control, that I had set that ball rolling in one way or another. And that's one of the greatest things about getting sober and doing the work to stay sober, is that you get that accountability, because there's not much we can control in this lifetime, in this world. But what I can control is my reactions and my actions. And so it's nice to kind of live from that perspective today, rather than, everybody's out to get me. It's like, no, life is happening for me.
It's a good perspective. I know where that perspective comes from. Is there a higher power element in this, or do you just not believe in that?
I do. I'm not really a religious person, or, I'm not sure if there's a guy in the sky that's the arbiter of good and bad. That doesn't matter to me, like what is or what isn't. I know that there is a loving universal flow or energy, something that I might understand more one day after I leave planet Earth. But I'm less concerned about what it is, but I know I know that there is. I have felt that presence. I think, everybody has, and I really rely on what I consider to be my gut instinct. Because, that gut instinct that I have, that doesn't come from me. That's my connection to this universal energy and this flow. And my job is to be able to pay attention to that, and to allow it to lead me where I need to go in life.
Yeah, one of my least favorite statements is always like, your higher power can be a doorknob. I'm like, no fucking way. Not a doorknob. I have to wash my hands after I touch my higher power. So the final question, how do you hope to educate others?
I hope by being as honest and vulnerable as I can, and by continuing to learn as much as I can about alcoholism and addiction and mental illness, and continuing to share my unique perspective, whether it be through a blog, whether it be through writing a book, or whatever it is I can do to help. Truly, that is my purpose. It gives me a sense of, I would never say like, oh, I'm happy about my past, but I don't regret it. And I'm happy today that I get to share it, and somebody else might say, yes, I can identify with that, I can relate to that, or maybe get some help out of it.
All righty, that's a wonderful, wonderful appearance. Here's the book, everybody. Bottoms up. It's a wonderfully designed cover. I absolutely love that. And
Thank you.
so check it out. It's here on Amazon. It's at other places if you don't like Amazon, like bookshop.org and places like that. So, you're not tied to Amazon. So, but here's the book. There's some wonderful reviews for it. Check it out. And thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So folks that are watching the live stream, I'm going to shut you off now. If you want to be part of the open mic, please use the Zoom link and we will invite you in. And next week we are going to be here on a Friday because of my schedule. So it's a very special Friday appearance with Blossom. No, actually our it's always Blossom, isn't that a very special episode? Now we're gonna have next week. Just go to my website and find out. I don't have it off the top of my head. Thanks everybody. What a great interview. Thank you so much, Tiffany.
Thank you.